I'm Marty Levinson. You're watching Northtown News.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
For the identity of the real Marty Levinson, please stay tuned for the Northtown News Magazine.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine show with the greatest cameraman around, Sonny Hirsch, and your host, Avi Myers.
Thank you, Marty. Avi Myers, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine, a presentation of Sonny Hirsch and myself. Dial us up on the web at www.ntnm.org. We're real big on community policing, and the Chicago Police Department here in the 24th District has done a major effort, despite being shorthanded, to allow us to still have monthly meetings. And we urge you to participate. National Night Out is the first Tuesday in August, and there will be neighborhood events throughout the area. It is a pleasure to have somebody who is, well, I would say he's technically an expatriate, but he was actually, born in South Africa, then he moved to the suburbs and all the rest of it. I don't know exactly all the history. Somebody who ran for Congress in the 9th District, who I supported strongly in Jewish Chicago, and somebody who and I don't think Jan Schakowsky likes me as much as she used to, but that's okay. And right now he is the editor-in-chief of Breitbart, as well as I think you're an lawyer for them too.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And that is Joe Pollak. Joe, how you doing?
Nice to be with you.
First of all, pleasure, and thank you very much. And you're in Chicago. Your parents are still here in Chicago, so
Still
I assume that's
right.
pardon.
And my grandmother returns 93 at the end of June. By the time this airs, she will be 93 years young.
That's very nice.
Yeah.
And you're a brand new daddy.
I am very happy about that. Our daughter Maya Chana was born on February 1st this year.
So that's terrific. And babies, I listen, I see the Facebook stuff, so I know she's doing well. So anyway, Breitbart, that's a whole different kind of style. You're now basically like, this is press stuff. Why don't you tell people a little bit about what Breitbart is for those who don't know?
Sure. Breitbart News is based at Breitbart.com, and it's political media on the conservative side, focusing on what Andrew Breitbart called citizen journalism. That was his vision and his legacy that continues. And the idea is that citizens can stand up to the mainstream media, which has a pronounced left-wing bias, and bring stories to us or become advocates for their own stories and tell America, tell the world what's really going on. We have 5 subsections. We have Breitbart TV, which is very popular, does a lot of video clips, original video. Big Government, which is one of the original big sites that Andrew started. Big Education is coming soon. That's not yet on the site, but we will be launching that soon. Big Journalism, Big Peace, and Big Hollywood. So we cover a variety of areas of policy, from foreign policy to media and celebrity news, and from a conservative political angle throughout. It's an alternative new media source of information for people, and it's been very effective at holding the mainstream media accountable, as well as producing great news scoops. Right now we've got a new one coming up on the website as I speak that'll be 3 weeks old by the time this show airs, but by that time you'll have a news scoop on Breitbart.com to read about. So we have amazing, original, insightful reporting, and we're continuing the legacy of Andrew Breitbart every day.
And by the way, I do get the daily, click on me thing in the mail.
Okay,
I get your daily emails from you guys. So I am interested in. One of the things I like about it, not that I try to be as fair as I can and label my opinion as opinion when I write things, but you guys don't make any bones about the fact where you're coming from. And the liberal media basically doesn't tell people where they're coming from. And when I read some are more liberal than others, even though the Washington Post could be considered a left-leaning paper. It's actually pretty fair, in my opinion, compared to the New York Times, who can lean so far left it's not even funny. And you tell people exactly where you're coming from. I know when I was running Jewish Chicago, I was never really totally left or right. I was maybe a little closer to the middle then, but I definitely leaned toward the right. And I would always have these ultra-liberal editors, because at least 90% of reporters are liberals, and that's pretty much what you're going to get. And I found myself working with people that weren't all that hot about Israel, who were Jewish, and trying to use their editing skills in such a way to take the viewpoint that the paper was trying to present and make it more palatable to the left.
That's right. What the mainstream media does is it tells you it's being objective, and in fact it slides its left-wing opinions under the radar, creating not just information that leans in one direction or another, but placing certain subjects off limits, so that even though these are reasonable subjects to discuss, they're seen as beyond the pale. And that's more about what the media does in terms of framing instead of actual reporting. All of that goes on under the guise of objectivity. And what we try to do is pierce that veil and say, no, you're not being objective, you're being liberal, you're being left-wing. You might as well admit it. We admit that we're conservative. We have different perspectives, there are differing ideas, differing opinions on the site, but they're all from a right-of-center point of view. There's nothing wrong with a press that admits openly that it has certain biases left or right, because then readers can judge for themselves how much they want to weight the bias in terms of digesting the information.
I think it's preferable.
It is preferable, and I think that the key really is in story selection. It's not in the facts you report. You have to be objective with the facts, whatever opinion you're coming from and trying to represent. It really isn't about how you select stories, how you frame stories, and what we present is an alternative framing to the one the mainstream media does. What the mainstream media often does is create new facts if it doesn't have them, selectively edit 911 calls from George Zimmerman, for example, or chop up remarks that Mitt Romney might have said, take them out of context in a way that it wouldn't for Barack Obama. I was reading the New York Times this past weekend, and they were defending Obama's remarks when he said that the private sector is doing just fine, and they really made the point of their article how unfair it was for Republicans to pick up on this little snippet of a fragment of conversation he may have had with reporters at the White House. Whereas, of course, if John McCain 4 years ago, and when he did say that the fundamentals of our economy are strong, that was seen as green light to go all in, attack McCain. It was a legitimate point to bring up, clear he doesn't understand the economy. He admitted it himself, sort of in a throwaway remark. So there's a clear double standard, and we hold them accountable to that double standard. And we say, look, if you're going to be left, just be left. Admit it. Increasingly, more and more liberal journalists agree and say, look, the New York Times should ditch its pretense at objectivity. It should admit that it's left of center, and then we can have an honest conversation about what's going on in our country. So there's no way in which any of that interferes with objectivity and reporting. It just puts greater power in the hands of the readers, the viewers, the audience, the consumers, which is what Andrew Breitbart believed in and what we try to do every day at Breitbart News.
No, I like that very much. By the way, just to give you some examples, because you're newer to the business, but you've really got an amazing handle on it. When I worked for the Sentinel, which was a very left-wing local Jewish paper, as a matter of fact, the bosses were card-carrying communists, albeit 1930s communists. They actually met with party officials in the office while I worked there. Now, they would take the same story from the Jewish Telegraph Agency, and they would make it a very far, they would take it like in basically a very leftist sort of way. When you read that story, you would think, oh, the horrible harm and all the rest of it, that's happening to whatever. The Jewish press would take that exact same JTA story and tilt it completely to the far right, which is where they're coming from. So that same exact original story was taken and twisted beyond belief, both to the right and to the left, and that was not uncommon.
As long as your readers know what they're getting, as long as they know that you have a stated bias. That
right, which, by the way, Breitbart does and almost nobody else does. The Sentinel is basically trying to trick you like there's no tomorrow.
Right. And this idea of contesting the space of what's actually happening in the world is not new.
No.
Two examples you provide are classic cases. But what is new is that the Times has migrated further to the left. I'm picking on the New York Times as one example, the newspaper of record, but mainstream media has migrated further to the left while still holding on to this kind of pretense of objectivity. I interviewed Ed Klein, who wrote the recent book, The Amateur, about President Barack Obama, and I asked him...
By the way, that's a really appropriate title.
Yes, and I said to him, some people have expressed surprise at your book. It's so critical of Obama, yet people think of you as a liberal. He says, well, I haven't really been a liberal or a left-wing for many years. People just think of me that way because I used to work for the New York Times. But the Times I worked for in the 60s and 70s was different than the Times of today. It may have editorially leaned to the left and so on, but it strove to be objective in its news reporting. And the shift that's happened has really happened over the last few decades. So he said people have a misconception. The Times at that point was as open to opinions and perspectives from conservatives as it was from liberals. That's no longer the case. The Times and other outlets have moved further to the left. I think part of that is the influence of the 60s, which continues today in the form of academics who were young people then, have gone through the academic system, now control substantial amounts of what young people learn and color the next generation of journalists. I think your figure of 90% of journalists being on the left is actually quite accurate. Tim Grosclose, an academic at UCLA, has done a study on this, and I think something like over 90% of the journalists in the Washington, D.C. metro area vote Democratic or are liberal and so on. It's definitely something that has an effect on how we receive our news and also on how editors tell us what the news is. Something can come out, for example, like Barack Obama sitting in Reverend Wright's church, and everybody knows about it, but the media then tells us that his speech on race, which is something completely unrelated to the topic of why he was sitting in an anti-American, anti-Israel church, why that sort of absolves him. So the media frames these issues, tells us when the issues are valid, when they're not, and that's also shifted. I think that there's a lot of frustration with that, and what Breitbart News is doing is reaching ordinary Americans who understand they're not being told the truth, and we give them a window onto what's really happening because we're correcting for the bias of the I almost said lamestream media, to quote Sarah Palin, but
I like that, actually.
And it's reaching the millions of people who Fox News is also reaching. I think there could be more news outlets in that market. There are millions of people who are not seeing, on left and right, by the way, who are not seeing reality represented by the mainstream media. They know that they're being given something that is spun, even though there's no admission that it's spun. So I think that's really what fuels the interest of our readers in what we do.
I'd like to get your opinion on the Comedy Network and their two news shows.
Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart, they are very left-wing, but funny occasionally.
Yeah.
I think they're funnier when they're even-handed, but sometimes they go where the mainstream media fears to tread, and some of the writers for our site take them very seriously because many people do get their news from The Daily Show. They get it in the form of parody, usually anti-conservative parody. I know Andrew used to feel that people shouldn't take it that seriously. People should learn to laugh at themselves, have a sense of humor, that sort of thing. So I think that, like Saturday Night Live, it's funniest when it's actually going at sacred cows. It's funniest when it's actually attacking sacred institutions which don't normally get attacked, which today include the Obama campaign, the Democrats, academic life, and so on and so forth. You saw Jon Stewart go after the Occupy Wall Street movement, for example, but that took several weeks of criticism. It took a long time for them to basically prove that they were kind of silly for him to do that. He has no such hesitation in going after conservatives, so there is an imbalance, and he admits that he's a liberal, but he tries to say it doesn't matter because it's comedy. I think that's true to some extent and also not. But one thing is for sure, that 4 years into the Obama administration, comedians haven't yet really learned how to make fun of Obama comfortably. And conservatives have to start competing in that market as well, start creating humor, creative content, things like that. That's one area I think
that is a real failing of conservatives.
Interest.
Do you take these guys, these Comedy Network guys, as real journalists at all?
They're entertainers.
Yeah.
And commentators. I don't know if they're journalists. They occasionally do some interesting journalistic things, but I don't think they would call themselves journalists. But they are part of the media. I mean, the media includes things beyond just journalism, which is why we cover Hollywood as well as journalism.
You know, it's funny, somebody whose name I don't have permission to mention, who I have a lot of respect for, has told me that he feels that one of the most serious problems today is that too many people watch this comedy stuff. Not just that, but guys like Bill Maher, all the rest of it, and take that as real news.
Well, I think it's important to remember that as many people as get their basic news from comedy, it's still a much smaller audience than Fox News gets for its commentary.
Yeah.
You know, I think The Five outperforms the Jon Stewart Show or Red Eye. Some of Fox News's commentary shows that aren't actually delivering news outperform the Jon Stewart Show and Stephen Colbert Show. Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart are outperforming CNN in turn. So that tells you something about where the kind of supposedly neutral network has fallen. That's because they're not neutral, they're left, and their audience has lost interest.
By the way, I actually had a child blocker both on CNN and Fox News when I had cable. And it's not that the truth is I don't want to get my news from TV. I actually one of the few people left that actually reads newspapers and reads things like Breitbart. I want to read something. You know, I don't want to be presented with it in a visual, audiovisual manner.
There is something to be said for holding a piece of paper. And the great thing about it is you often wander into stories you might not ordinarily have been interested in. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, and I read pretty much every day the whole thing.
It's great
on
paper.
The bus to and
really
from work.
It's a great paper.
You know, and they have great pieces on books and on art and things like that. So I don't agree with everything I read in there, but it's
by the way,
definitely
technically I don't get that many papers in the house. I'm reading it on a screen. So
right. I do think, though, that when there are so many other competing news sources, you have to provide something unique in the world of print media in order to get people to keep buying your product. The Wall Street Journal has increased the number of its subscribers over the past several years, and I think that's partly because it's providing financial data and it's providing a conservative perspective on the editorial pages, which is not provided by other national newspapers. And so people are subscribing more and more to the Wall Street Journal. They also improved their format, which helped. But
see, I also relish the large features. I mean, if, for instance, the 6,000-word piece the New York Times did on Obama, about a week and a half or so as of when we filmed, if you presented that at word for word on television, the average speaking voice on radio and TV is 150 words a minute. It would take somebody 40 minutes start to finish to speak that entire article. And since an average show is about 41 minutes and 30 seconds, that leaves 45 seconds for beginning and credit, and the rest would be commercials.
Right. Yeah, it's a challenge, and something print media has to do. That's why print media sometimes dovetails with online media to present some of those longer features. But one of the really interesting things about what's happening in print media is that people aren't giving up on it entirely. There still is a market for books. It's different than the market was even just a few years ago, but you can succeed as long as you're providing what consumers want. Consumers have lost that voice in many electronic news formats. The major TV networks, NPR, tax subsidized and so on, you don't really have a voice to talk back to these people. And so the internet has become that alternative, particularly social media like Twitter and Facebook, which has been very powerful from a conservative perspective. And it's been a kind of instant feedback mechanism that viewers never really had before, or listeners never really had before. So all of these things are about creating more voices, not fewer voices. And that's what Andrew stood for, and that's what I believe in as well.
That sounds good. Let's shift the conversation to our president, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm one of my personal favorite people, not. But, you know, one of the things that really bothered me, we had just had the Wisconsin, as of when we filmed, we just had the Wisconsin recall election. And he had several events in Minnesota, then he flew over for several events in Illinois, completely skipped Wisconsin, and even though he thought that the government, he obviously felt they were going to lose and he didn't want to be associated with the campaign. The fact is, you'd still think you'd want to give it the college try, and you would think if he puts an effort into the campaign, they'll put more effort into him in November. There's so many things from his direction where I see it's like all for me and me for nobody, except me.
It's a complete abdication of leadership. I mean, I happen to know that Democrats and liberal journalists, although I repeat myself, they're furious at Obama for skipping Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And the fact that Obama skipped Wisconsin, I think, reflects a broader problem with his leadership style, which is to say it's an empty leadership style. It is very narcissistic. It is very cult of personality. It doesn't translate into effort on behalf of local campaigns, doesn't translate into things his own supporters had hoped he would do. He's not leading the country anymore. That's been the case for several months already. He's just gone into full campaign mode. But he's not even leading his own party in its campaign mode. It's all about him. And it's just something the country's never seen before. President Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, was in a way the real winner in Wisconsin because he actually went there and campaigned. Now think about that for a second. Bill Clinton was the enemy of the labor unions when he was president because he had spent his whole career as the new Democrat, the one who was going to move Democrats to the center away from old labor. He goes there, mends fences with labor, does an event or two for Tom Barrett as part of labor's big push in Wisconsin, and still wins because labor loses, thereby vindicating Clinton's philosophy of centrism, free markets, free trade, which labor opposed for so many years. So Clinton actually was the big winner, even more, I think, than Scott Walker in Wisconsin. And I think you're going to see Hillary return in 2016. Ed Klein says that Bill tried to get Hillary to run in 2012 and she declined. But Obama has abdicated leadership so much that actual decisions about the future of the Democratic Party are now being made in his absence or behind his back, let's say.
Yeah. That somehow doesn't surprise me. He's never successfully run anything. I never understood in the first place how he got to be president. I understand the speaking style, but the mass hysteria that existed among people for Barack Obama in 2008, I actually found frightening. I actually could have imagined the way he was getting people to idolize him based on absolutely zero accomplishments whatsoever. And the fact is, even some of his real accomplishments were put up by people like Emil Jones, the head of the Illinois Senate, who wanted to prop him up and make him look good, and made him the sponsor of other people's bills to give him a better look. I almost felt like if he would have told these people to jump off a bridge, they would have done it.
Well, our economy has jumped off that bridge to some extent with many Democratic votes. But let me say this, he did run his campaign successfully, and David Axelrod, I think, was a big part of that. And Axelrod's strategy, I think, historically has been to use his contacts and experience in media to help a candidate create a story around themselves. And that worked for Barack Obama.
He was a really good reporter with the Tribune. I remember what he wrote for the Trib.
And the problem Axelrod now faces is twofold. One, the media isn't what it used to be. There's a new media. There's Breitbart. There's the Huffington Post. There's all kinds of new media sources that
Which, by the way, Breitbart helped start.
That's right. That's right. And the biggest story the Huffington Post ever broke was the story about people being bitter clingers to guns, God, and religion during the 2008 campaign. That was the biggest story HuffPo ever broke. And it was broken by a citizen journalist who was writing there and reporting on a meeting she had been to where Obama was talking about the voters of Pennsylvania. So new media is not, I mean, it didn't overwhelm old media in 2008, but it is overwhelming it today, partly because of the commercial decline of old media, but partly because new media is just so much more powerful than it was. So that's one thing Axelrod hasn't faced before. And the other thing he hasn't faced before is really adverse news. It's easy to help your candidate coast to victory when you can get the divorce records of an opponent unsealed, or where some scandal engulfs the other party, and so on and so forth. But where you've got to sell yourself on your record, and you can no longer make up a story out of thin air, but you've got to tell a story with the very uncomfortable facts you have. I think it's a unique challenge he's never faced before. And they're facing a Romney campaign which is very much focused on new media, very much focused on rapid response. Romney's been pretty absent from the media throughout this month of June and much of May. He's sitting back and letting voters look at Obama as the issue, not whether we choose Obama or Romney. Romney's been very skillful at letting Obama have that spotlight. He likes the spotlight, let him have it. Meanwhile, his campaign is active on the internet, active in print, active anywhere they can be active in terms of responding to things Obama says. So Axelrod's never encountered quite such headwinds, to use a favorite Obama phrase. And I think that it's frustrating him and frustrating his campaign. They're not used to dealing with it. I think Obama let slip a few days ago that he misses the days of running against John McCain. And he meant it for ideological reasons, but I think he also meant it for tactical reasons. I think they're losing the media battle, which is one reason I think if the election were held today, which is a day in June, not quite the air date of July, by which time many things may have changed, but I think if it were held today, it would be very close and Romney would win.
I think so too. You know what? I'm glad you brought up the point about the divorces, especially with Breitbart, the media, and all the rest of it. The Tribune actually were the company I could tell from reading the Tribune through their editorials that they definitely were going to wind up endorsing Obama more than a year or even a year and a half before it really came to it. It was pretty obvious the way they were pushing him, despite knowing that there was a lack of accomplishment. And Obama in the primary was the underdog. He was losing by 20 points. He would have lost if his chief opponent, whose name I can't forget right now, who was 20 points ahead of him in the poll, the Tribune opened up his divorce records that showed, and when they talk about, speaking of bias, they talked about, everybody said he beat his wife. What he did, and I'm not excusing it, is he hit his wife in the ankle. Okay, that's what was in those papers. Okay, that got the guy the rap as a wife beater. Now, I'm not contesting the rap, but the Tribune are the ones that push to open the files. Without those files, Obama never even wins the primary. They actually took a similar tack with the Republican opponent afterwards, where they also opened divorce records to show that his wife, who was like a major league actress and one of the most gorgeous women around, that wasn't enough for him. He wanted to take her to sex clubs. But the Tribune are the ones that actually opened that, and I think without the Tribune, Obama never gets to be president either. And well, go ahead, please.
Well, as people have observed, when you have a country with a vigorous and free press, the press often decides who rules the country, and that's as it should be. The thing that needs to change is the press needs to truly be a vigorous and free press, which it isn't. It's very one-sided and in many ways very elitist. So you're right, the Tribune has a double standard. Much of the mainstream media had a double standard, partly because we're pushing back. They're really on their toes, and they're trying at least to create the perception of even-handedness. It certainly isn't what happens in practice. There's been no demand, for example, to see or to uncover any of Barack Obama's college records the way there was with George Bush when the New Yorker uncovered them in 1999 and so forth. There still isn't that kind of investigative reporting going on. And most of that kind of thing is happening online. It's amazing that 4 years into Obama's presidency, we have now 2 biographies coming out within the space of as many months detailing Obama's past. Ed Klein focuses on Obama's past in Chicago and leading up to the presidency. Then you have the new book by David Moranis of the Washington Post about Barack Obama's childhood, high school, and early student years, which yield all kinds of information about girlfriends and drug habits and things like that. It's amazing we're learning this now. This is the kind of thing that should have happened before this man was placed in charge of the big red button.
Very much so.
And it's amazing now the media is celebrating these biographies, particularly the Moranis one, which is seen as more pro-Obama. But it's just unheard of in American history that you have this much new information coming out, and much of it we've done ourselves at Breitbart News. We have broken quite a few stories about Barack Obama's past. And
Breitbart.com, it's a really
yeah.
cool place. You know, one of the things I want to just, with the Tribune, and finish that up and then get back to Obama, people don't realize that a paper like the Tribune has a vested interest in who is mayor, governor, and around here, not just for a number of reasons. They being a large corporation themselves, their profits can be very dependent on those sort of things. It could be the way their property tax. As a matter of fact, there was a major scandal when I was in college. The Sun-Times was getting a $400,000 a year tax break on their taxes, but they always supported an assessor who eventually was indicted. The Tribune also has a vested interest with all their companies and all their businesses in how they play the game. They might knock Mike Madigan all year long, but when it comes time to endorsing him, you know they're going to endorse him, no matter what. So that's a game that papers like the Tribune play. Back to Obama. I'm sorry about that.
well, he certainly was the beneficiary of that kind of vested interest type of reporting. There was a pattern, and remains a pattern, of reporters reporting favorably on Obama in order to get close to him, to celebrate events with him, to be invited to state dinners. The New York Times was hawking Obama merchandise around the time of the inauguration, for example. Now, this is not necessarily new to Obama. There were lots of, I think, valid charges against journalists during the Bush administration of the same kind of thing. They will report more favorably on the administration if they can get access to key players and provide the scoops and the interviews and that kind of thing. But we've seen nothing on the scale, or even in some ways of the kind of adulation that Obama had inspired in the media. In many ways, they invested in him, as you say, in a very serious way. There was even talk a couple of years ago about getting Obama to do some kind of media bailout, the way that they bailed out the auto industry because so many newspapers were going down. And enough journalists retain a value for independence, they realized it wouldn't be good to have the government funding their papers or to be in hock to the government. But there really is a sea change now with new media. And Breitbart News is not just providing a platform to for people to dissent, it's also doing investigative journalism where we're uncovering information the media will otherwise ignore. So it's a lot of fun, day in and day out. We have a lot of fun with it. And just keep coming back to Breitbart.com and see what we're up to.
No, it is, and there's some very interesting stories. And, you know, like you said, it's properly labeled, and I like that very much. And, by the way, just to plug a friend of mine, you're here actually, one of the things you're doing right afterwards is he's giving a lecture over at the Republican Jewish Coalition, and I want to say hi to Michael Menace. I wanted to interview him yesterday, but he wasn't at the Jewish Fest. He actually had to have office hours because he's so far behind work-wise, it's not even funny, but he's really a great guy, and he's done a wonderful job. And in terms of one thing I want to say publicly, between the difference between like the Republican Jewish Coalition over here and a lot of the Democratic activities, the local Jewish Democratic people have actually had events on Passover serving food that's inappropriate. Not that they're religious or claim to be, but that to me is not unusual. At the Republican Jewish Coalition, Michael Menace makes sure that all the food over there is kosher. They even have evening services usually after the meetings, and he's always shown a lot of respect toward the religious in general. And I want to applaud Mike for all the things he's done along those lines. At this point, Mickey's hands are really saying goodbye. We want to thank you especially for that wonderful Marty Levinson and, you know, and really excellent insights into the media. Joel Pollak at Breitbart.com, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, all the luck and best of luck to your wife and your baby. And Sonny Hirsch, entire technical crew, thank you so much. Looking for, we're going to start with the Jewish festival stuff in another week or so. So stick around, guys. Have a good time. Be well. Bye-bye.